This is our last webinar for 2024, and so we're delighted to have such an esteemed guest as Alison Hernandez to talk about how to create sustainable productivity. Before we dive into our discussion, I want to encourage active participation through the next hour, and feel free to jot your questions in the Q&A, the chat box there. Donna Burr from our office will be leading that discussion, and then we'll be pulling some questions from that later on as well. Remember, the session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. Our masterclass series is produced to provide you access to the latest thinking and insights. It is just one of the ways that we look to support your interim career through continuous learning. The library of past webinars is a fantastic resource for you to dive into at any time. And with summer and the holidays coming up, that might be something that you want to do. We're well advanced on plans for the series for 2025, and we'll kick off the year in February with a session on generative AI, very topical. But today is about the intersection of meaningful work and productivity. So let me introduce Alison Hernandez. Alison is a longevity specialist, a future of work advisor, a career mobility and transition expert. She's the Asia Pacific lead for HSM Advisory, which is Professor Lynda Gratton's consultancy business. She recently co-founded Recreate 100, which is taking a fresh approach to the new era of longevity and what that means for us as individuals and organisations. She previously co-founded SageCo, which was subsequently acquired by Randstad. She's the ambassador and chair for Family Friendly Workplaces Australia. She's a Wagga Pay Equity Ambassador, and just because she doesn't do enough, she's also on the board of Wheelchair Sports New South Wales. Of all, Alison enjoys a portfolio career, which allows her to align her work with her passion. Alison lives and works in the beautiful Lennox Head in northern New South Wales, where she walks her dog on the beach at sunrise every day. What a nice way to start. Alison's recently back from London, where HSM Advisory have been working on their latest research. And it's so hot off the press that Professor Lynda Gratton only presented this final report last week in London. With the themes of longevity and meaningful work top of mind for most of us, the HSM Advisory team wanted to not only explore that, but come up with practical frameworks that organisations could embrace. I'm really looking forward to hearing what sustainable productivity means and hoping maybe it's the almighty antidote to burnout, but we can explore that with you, Alison. Over to you.
Fantastic. And Angela, thanks for your comment in the chat. I hope that I will satisfy that thirst for a good holistic productivity measure today, because certainly those are all the areas that we're touching on. So thanks for your comment. And thanks so much, Donna and the Jacinta and the Watermark team for inviting me along to join today. It's a fantastic opportunity to collaborate, and thank you all for being here. It is important at times to get ourselves out of the weeds of our everyday, look up and look ahead and think about what trends are playing out, what will impact the future, and what can we do about that today and tomorrow. So thank you for the great introduction. Jacinta talked about HSM and about our work. And just to share with you here, today I'm going to take a look back over the last 15 years of research and just talk about some of the, culminated insights that have arisen from our work with our Global Future of Work contributors this year, celebrating 15-year anniversary. And there's been 3 major research themes each year. The third and final research theme of 2024 is on productivity, and that is hot off the press. I literally got the insights earlier this week, and I'm going to be sharing those with you today. But what I thought we might do is, to start with looking at some of the more dynamic macro trends that are, playing out, and get you to consider whatever hat that it is you're wearing today. How will this impact, whether you come from a financial, legal, risk, sustainability, HR, or some other different executive hat? How will these macro trends impact upon your work? How will they impact upon your lives? And how do they interact? And at the very least, I think starting off with this macro view helps to explain some of the shifts and the trends that we are all experiencing and seeing play out in the workplace. So let's dive in. Firstly, we've got longevity. Now, Lynda Gratton in the masterclass in London earlier this year stated that longevity has been one of the most significant trends in her life's work. And she also commented that she's heartened to witness an increased interest globally from boards and executive teams that she consults with, and what it actually means for business. And obviously, Jacinta, your annual executive interim search survey showed that longevity is a key finding for the second consecutive year this year. So what is driving it? Well, firstly, we know that life expectancy is increasing 2 to 3 years every decade. So in practical terms, we can expect to live a decade longer than your parents, and we can live 20 years longer than our grandparents. And of course, there's a multitude of factors feeding into that. Advances in science, medicine, health, allegedly, and nutrition. I'd be interested to know how many of you have children or grandchildren or family members who are aged under 10. Because, perhaps put up a show of hands, because longevity experts are predicting that 50% of these children under 10 will live to become centenarians, and they will celebrate their 100th birthday. So that's quite remarkable to consider, and obviously needs to get us to reimagine our future possibilities for not only ourselves, but for our successors. And alongside increased life expectancy, we've also got what demographers are calling the baby bust, because everything has to have a name. And fertility rates are falling almost everywhere for women of all education and income levels. The UN tells us we need a replacement fertility rate globally of 2.2 if we're going to maintain the current global population. And yet we have countries like Korea at 0.72, China at 1.2, Japan slightly better at 1.3. And the governments are introducing a wide range of measures, including in Japan, actually. Free college is on offer now for families who have more than 3 children. So Australia fares a little bit better. There were some headlines recently. It's dipped below 1.6, but we are still, of course, below that replacement rate of 2.2. So that impacts the workforce undoubtedly and the supply of future talent. But the other question to ask ourselves wearing our professional hat is, how are we embracing the longevity economy? Now, this is predicted to be valued at over $110 billion in Australia and $35 trillion globally, because people over 50 represent around 50% of global spend on products and services. Obviously depends on which industry you're coming from, but there's some great research out there that Forbes did with AARP, and I'd be happy to share that with anybody who wants to reach out. The second mega trend is globalization. 71% of CEOs are saying global skill shortages are a top challenge, and we've got that double whammy of the decline of younger workers coming through with the exit of our older workers, and the last of the baby boomer generation turned 60 this year. So 1946 to 64, celebrating their 60th birthdays, and we know the average retirement age in Australia is not much older than 60. So we're seeing this exodus. And we've also got, interestingly, a contrasting picture that is emerging. On the one hand, we've got advancements with over 40 countries offering digital nomad visas. Great news for people that want to travel and work. And on the other hand, we've got executives telling people, get back to the office. So there's a lot of tension around the future of work and reimagining different ways of working. Tech is our third trend. Now, we're not overly focused on that today, but it actually is a thread that is woven throughout this conversation. We're now seeing over 200 million knowledge workers per week using ChatGPT for their non-routine and cognitive tasks. And that's doubled in a 1-year period, which is astounding, really. What's interesting about it from my perspective is that AI provides us with a refund of time if it aids productivity as it should. So the question here for us to think about is, who gets that refund? Do I get that refund of time, or does that go back into the team pot or for the organization to use at its discretion? Who gets to choose how that refund is spent? The global head of Microsoft Work Index spoke at our recent HSM Masterclass and believes that individuals should own that refund of time, and went on to talk about what a positive impact that would have on well-being and engagement rates. So I'll leave you all to ponder that one. Then we have environment, with way over 65 million workers now working in a climate-related role. I'm sure some of you are online with us today. The question for organizations here is, are you building or buying your green talent pipeline into the future as this demand increases? So in some organizations we're working with, they are green skilling at scale, rather than just reserving the expertise and the skills with a few single points of sensitivities. But it depends on the organization and the context. And our final trend around societal shifts. And I think one of the examples I want to talk about here is that intersection of work and family. Because I would have to say that over 90% of the conversations I have with people start with a conversation about family, about caregiving, be it elder care or childcare, and trying to reduce the tensions that exist for our employees in that regard. And it's genuinely encouraging to see so many organizations putting in place policies and processes that support employees to thrive at work and at home. We want them to bring their best selves to work. I always used to say to my team, I also want you to take your best self home at the end of the day, which is why I'm so passionate about the work that you mentioned, Jacinta, with family-friendly workplaces. And if you don't know about that initiative, please do check it out. And anyone on the line, I'd be interested to know, that has social impact as a core KPI, because we are seeing a rise with the S in ESG fast catching up and even overtaking in some reports the E and the G in terms of a priority area for investors, simply because people want to buy from, invest in, and work for organizations that can demonstrate a positive social impact. So much to think about, and every single one of those, to a greater or lesser degree, will play out in your work and when you strategize for the future. Now, before we move on, Lynda did ask if we could gather some data on the call today in preparation for her drafting of the Outlook 2025 white paper, which she sends out every January for her reflections on the year that was and her predictions for the year ahead. So I'll just pause here, and I'd like to pose a question to you. If you can please actively participate in the chat, that would be amazing. And in return, we'll make sure we share with you the Outlook 2025 in January. So the question I'd like to ask today is on tech and AI implementation. And we'd love to gather your perspectives on the key pain points and challenges that you are currently facing in terms of AI implementation. So think about the hat you wear. What are the pain points and the challenges either you personally are facing in adopting AI or implementing it for your team and across your organization? So I'll just give you a minute there to reflect and to share in the chat. Jacinta, what about you? How's your ChatGPT life going?
Yeah, interestingly, Alison, as you know, in the preparation for today, we shared that the themes that the future of work over 15 years have been looking at, and the sort of 14 years that Watermark have been doing our survey, often run quite parallel. And this year, AI jumped out as longevity and AI were two of the biggest themes that people are grappling with. And what came out of that was that people are very open to exploring it. It moves quickly, the pace. And so people, you know, almost a bit hesitant to train too much because it'll be superseded quite quickly. Yeah. So, you know, maybe a piece for people to sort of, it's okay to jump in at any point and it will always move quickly. Yeah. So, you know, how do you keep on top of that? I think is a big part for myself and for others we talk to.
Yeah. So it seems from the chat, you know, it's the breadth, it's the number of tools, the range of tools, which tool to use, where do I start? You know, it's the cost, it's, you know, the guidelines, the data privacy, the IP protection, some really good contributions there. Yes, the ethical implementation is so critical. Loving the use of AI for sure. I mean, you know, it gets us away from the blank page as far as I'm concerned. When I start a project now, I can jump to 80% there by using AI. And so, you know, I call it my blank page strategy. I can just craft, then spend my skill and talent for what it's worth, crafting the last 20% rather than doing the grunt work of the first 80. Excellent. And of course, thank you for that, and continue to contribute as your thoughts come through. So when we look at the trends, obviously they operate in a dynamic system and there's an intersectionality to these trends. So for example, at the intersection of technology and globalization, we see the rise of the gig economy and a growing contingent workforce, which is great news, of course, for Watermark and the team. And research does suggest that this is well over a third of our workforce globally today, and is predicted to accelerate in growth to 50% by 2030, which is incredible. So as an organizational leader, I'd be thinking, well, how am I going to create a blended workforce strategy? Because this certainly is a different deal, and it's a deal that needs to be hyper-personalized for the different cohorts. And at this intersection of longevity, we also have the rise of what we call the multi-stage life. And this was written up in Lynda's most famous book of the 11 she's written, which is The 100-Year Life. Now, I'll just take a moment on this because I think it's interesting at the personal level for us and our careers. What we are seeing, and what we have been seeing over the last decade gradually, but now it's getting faster, is a shift from a traditional 3-stage life, as you see on the left, to the multi-stage life on the right. So the 3-stage life is my dad's story, and probably your parents' story, your grandparents' story as well. So dad came out of the Navy, went to work for IBM, and was there for 35 years. Now, he moved roles, he moved countries, but he moved in lockstep with all of his peers through the life course of education, work, and life, and then retired at 55. And this year is his 30th year in retirement. So almost as long in retirement as in the workforce. Now, that might seem like a really lovely notion to most of us sitting here today on a Thursday morning, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. The multi-stage life, though, is my story, and it's my daughter's story. She's 22, and I would hazard a guess, it's most of your stories. And it reflects the workforce of the future, which will be, as I mentioned before, hyper-personalized, flexible, and so many more transition points. So what does that mean for us as executives? Well, we have to really think about and carefully plan and navigate our careers more so than ever before. But we also need to reimagine different possible futures for ourselves, because depending on where you're joining from today in your life course, you know, how can we possibly predict where we will be and what we'll be doing 10 years from now? But what we can adopt are some of those strategies that Jacinta mentioned at the beginning. You know, how do we future-proof ourselves? Well, investing in lifelong learning, reinvention, and reskilling. And I was doing a leaders career development session yesterday. The biggest challenge and pain point was time. How do I find the time? My time gets hijacked. Well, you need to lock it in and fiercely protect it, because this is about you and your future. And as hard as it is, even half an hour a week or an hour every month where you intentionally read, learn, and get a new perspective is time well spent. We're going to be taking more career breaks. It goes without saying, we're living longer, we're working longer, and if we're going to sustain our performance and our energy, let's face it, over a longer lifespan, we're going to need more care breaks, more study breaks, periods of volunteering, well-being breaks, or travel. And potentially we can do a number of those at the same time, and time between gigs for interim execs to reset. So that's not an unfamiliar notion, I'm sure, with many of you. There's been so much change, and yet some of the core elements over the last 15 years remain the same. And so talking about a more human-centered approach, which really comes out strongly in our research, these are the 3 consistent themes that we've seen annually in our research over the last 15 years. So friendships and belonging, you know, having a significant friendship at work is a predictor of our satisfaction and engagement. Super interesting. I'm sure that you, like me, have friendships for life that stemmed from work. So we need to plan for and expect an increasing focus in organizations on social connectivity, creating networks, communities of practice, and enabling people to forge friendships, because we need to combat the next epidemic, which is loneliness, with the World Health Organization actually now standing up a new committee on loneliness to address it. And on that, we recently had our You OK Day, but I think we know a lot of people are not okay. And so well-being remains a priority. Microsoft Work Index finds that 64% of employees are struggling to have enough energy to just get their work done. So we'll talk a bit more about energy when we get to productivity. And the third golden thread is interesting and meaningful work. And I have to say, over the last 20 years of being in career management and coaching, I find this is the missing link when people are dissatisfied with their career. I don't feel that I'm doing work that is interesting and meaningful. So great.
Alison, if I can quickly add to that, meaningful work is, we talk to at Watermark, we talk to a lot of people during the course of a day about their career and over the year. And meaningful work has been coming at us like a tsunami, and it's this beautiful thread, but you weren't allowed to talk about it for a long time, and now it's the first thing people want. I want meaningful work, I want impact, I want to follow purpose, passion. So aligned with the conversations we have every day.
Yeah, and I think going back to the dialogue in the chat about AI, the question to ask is, how can we leverage AI and technology to free up our people, give them that refund of time so that they can invest in more interesting and meaningful work that's aligned with their skills, their passions, their interests, their purpose, etc. Needs to be value creation, obviously, but that's a really that's the key, I think, to unlocking, the future of work. And I think if we were selling tech transformation projects on that basis of communication, then we would fare a lot better in terms of engaging people.
Yep.
So just then looking to the year ahead. And we're seeing in organizations that we're surveying and talking to through our interviews, hackathons, and collaboration jams, an increasing focus on skill-based hiring and career mobility. And I've got a case study on that later. So we know that our skills will expire quickly as the world evolves and as technology evolves. So what it is we should be focusing on as leaders are the human skills that we will need to drive collaboration, connection, and innovation across our teams. And then we're seeing a human-centric workplace priority, which is great news. I'm sure many of you will agree. There's a really great piece of research you could look at called the HP Work Relationship Index, and that found only 22% of knowledge workers in Australia have a healthy relationship with work. 22%. And that's actually lower in Australia than in the US and UK. That was alarming, and I dug right into that to try and find out why. So you'll have to have a look at the research. But I think the point I'd like to make here is that a human-centered workplace goes way beyond the lazy discourse about home versus office. And it should include not just where we are working, but why we are working, how we are working, and with whom or with what we are working, if we consider AI as one of our team. And then moving on to our latest research theme, redefining productivity. So this is a key focus in the future of work going forward across the public and the private sector. Is anyone on the line working in New South Wales public sector right now? I would imagine we might have a few people.
Yeah.
You'd be familiar. Yeah. And you'd be familiar then with the drive to implement best practice productivity and digital capability. They sit hand in glove within the sector. I think that language is really important here. When people hear productivity, how does it land? Put your thoughts in the chat. If I say we want more productivity, what are the words that come to mind? How does that land?
It generally feels like there's a bit of a whip out to me, Alison, that we want more from less, basically.
Yeah, and exactly, David has said the same.
There you go, yeah.
And Nicole, yeah. Oh, wow, yeah, retrenchment, headcount reduction, absolutely.
Yeah.
because the past predicts the future, and that's what we've done. We've talked about productivity, and we've talked about, and then what happens is we see, you know, and that's not, I've worked in outplacement and career transition for the last 20 years. It's not a very creative way of tackling a cost issue, to be fair. And I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time about how cost savings can be made, and you can keep people, or it's not really an either or, it's an and. So, you know, it's really about using the right language. And what I would say, HSM, we prefer to talk more about sustainable productivity or sustainable high performance, rather than just landing it as that cold, hard productivity terminology. But so I'd be keen to hear how you're talking about it in your organizations. And importantly, we need to expand our productivity definition and the metrics that we're using. But before we go there, I'd love to just launch a quick Zoom poll and ask you, of the 3 priorities that we're hearing about globally, what is your main priority for the year ahead? And of course, there may be others, but of the 3 that have bubbled to the surface from our research, I would love for you to share, of the 3, where is your organization focusing, or where are you focusing in your role, depending on the hat you wear? Is it as skills as the building blocks of the future? Is it placing humans at the center of your work design? Or is it looking at productivity? Just give you a moment to.
While that's coming through, Alison, someone's asked, could we tease out the difference between individual, organizational, and macroeconomic productivity?
I think we're going to get there. We will get to that. Yes, absolutely. Because, and it's a great question, and because productivity is often thought about at the macro level, and it relies on organizations to ignite action and to achieve results. The reality is it actually occurs at the individual level. So, you know, we often start in the wrong place. So we will cover that though. Great question. Thank you. So coming out as the priority, it's neck and neck, human at the center. Well, that's really actually reassuring to see. I'm quite happy about that. With skills as the building blocks coming as a close second, and productivity at 23%. So, okay, perhaps, you know, when you've finished this webinar, it may be that productivity goes a little higher, potentially in the list. Once we explore some of the pain points, some of the risks, and also, I hope, some of the opportunities that it brings. So let's move on then to productivity, which no doubt is a challenge. And you can see the scale of it here and the impact that disengaged employees will have. The 127 hours, let me unpack that a little bit. So what that stat is referring to is that globally, the average person will spend 127 hours a year regaining focus after a distraction or an interruption. And actually, Australia came in slightly higher in this research as a participating country at 131 hours. So if we assume a 48-week year, work year, for those of you that are taking your 4 weeks annual leave, well done. That's nearly 3 hours a week in wasted potential. And that's just messages, meetings, pings, notifications, you know, whatever's happening. People walking by in the office, stopping to ask a quick question, or, you know, pinging you on chat when you're working remotely. Takes us out of the moment. It breaks our productive flow. So that's what we're talking about there. And they're not just wasted time, but it's wasted potential where we could be doing that more meaningful work. So the Economist Impact modeled the cost as well of this impact, and you can see that there. I'd love to ask in the chat, actually, how do you manage distractions at work? What strategies do you employ? How do you stay in your swim lane and block it all out and get on with the task at hand and come in on time without needing to sort of reset and get back to where you were? I'd love to hear your tip.
The common one I hear for that, Alison, is people sort of, you know, only looking at their emails, you know, at set times so that you're not distracted by them. Yeah.
Picking a quiet spot, definitely. Give the phone away. Love that one. Drop it in the pool like I did the other day. That helps. Being without a phone for 24 hours definitely got some work done. Noise cancelling headphones, blocking calendar, AirPods, etc. Turning off chat, such a simple thing, but when you're trying to get a project done, especially if it's focus work, just turning off notifications and shutting down every other app just for that period of time. It's such a simple thing, but so effective. Excellent. Okay, so the more friction we can remove in our day, then the more time we've got to spend on the work we love, that we're good at, where we're learning, where we're growing, where we're developing, and where we're adding value. Imagine that. That would be spectacular. So certainly productivity is making headlines. Here's some global headlines, but also from Australia, just for you to cast your eye over. So the topic is heating up, and obviously we have the Productivity Commission here, led by the fabulous Danielle Wood now, and they are tackling this issue at a systemic, macro level, as going back to the previous question. And they are calling out to organizations to step up to the challenge. Where we come in is, how do you create the value at an individual level? And that's what we're here to really talk about. The key pain points that we found in our research around productivity are too much time and energy spent on the debate around workplace presence rather than actually the outcomes focus that we're looking for. Change fatigue, and with it, the lack of clarity that brings. People are sort of heading in one direction, and then there's a whole about turn, and they've got to head in another direction, but they're not quite clear. And the impact that all of this has on employee engagement and well-being. So I'd like to bring this back, as I've said, the macro, the organizational, the individual, to the level of the individual, and ask you the following question. And that is, if you can share in the chat, when you are at your most productive, when you are feeling energized, in flow, getting shit done, and personally and professionally, really, really productive, what is it you're doing? What are the factors that are fueling that productivity? What are the ingredients that you need in the bowl to fuel your own productivity? Let's just have a look at what people say. So Jacinta, tell me about a time when you felt most productive recently. When did you have one of those days where you go, yes, I'm air punching. It was a great day, got a lot done, did what I needed to do. What about you? What were the factors involved?
I think it's when you're doing work that aligns with your meaning. The outcome is going to be impactful, and it just makes it easier to focus and get stuff done and enjoy the experience of it.
Yeah. People are driven by deadlines. Yeah. I'm a bit like that too. I can be a little lastminute.com, but sometimes that works well for me, harnessing that energy. It has done since university. I'd have 6 weeks for an assignment and I'd do it in the last 2 days. It's only powerful when there's a need. Collaboration, no interruptions, meaningful. Yep, there's that word again. When you're well rested, yes. The well-being and the energy management, critical. Yeah. Kevin as well. Great well-being, the 4 pillars of good health, stress, sleep, exercise, and diet. We need to pay attention to those. And I think I've got a lot better, and I'm sure many of you have, over the life course. I used to be shocking at actually my own personal well-being and setting those guardrails, and now it's a priority. And I have to know when to say no, and I have to know when to guard and protect my time to spend walking on the beach at sunrise with the dog.
Yeah, I think that longevity piece has really helped. That longevity used to be something that was sort of essentially kicked down the road. We'll worry about it later. It's here, it's arrived. So, and it's personal. And so, and health's personal. So those two have just tied in so nicely that they are now at the forefront, and organizations have to deal with them.
So true. And it's not all bad news that we're living and working longer. It's actually really good news. It's actually giving us time back in our day, in our week, in our year. We have that gift of time. We're getting a bonus decade on our parents, all things being even, obviously. And we can actually then reimagine future possibilities for ourselves and create a future that is exciting. But we have to sustain our energy and our productivity over a longer period of time. So as I can see from the chat and in the conversation we've had, Jacinta, we take an emotion-based view of productivity, excitement, energy, being in a flow state, those sorts of things. And yet, what are we measuring at an organizational level? Machine metrics rather than human metrics. So let's have a look at the iceberg. I like the iceberg analogy because I was born in Southampton, and that's where the Titanic set sail from. Not sure I should share that. That's I wouldn't even be here actually, but my great-grandfather worked in the docks down in Southampton, but had tuberculosis and did not go on the Titanic. So there's a story. There's something you didn't know about.
Sliding doors. There is
There's something you didn't know about me, which, and it's not much that you didn't know about me. So let's have a look at the iceberg. Now, in this year's Human Capital Trends, Deloitte found that 74% of leaders are saying it's critical or very, very important that organizations measure performance and productivity better than they are. So not that they measure it, but they measure it better than they are. And yet only 17% feel that their organization is actually doing this. So the culmination of this year's research into productivity has shown us that the optimum state is the creation of a holistic and complete data set. And yet, if we think about it, what we're measuring and what we're tracking and what we're communicating in organizations, it's all the stuff above the line, and we're ignoring the below the waterline, human metrics. So every organization, depending on industry size, etc., will need its own signature approach. There's definitely not a one size fits all here. But if we can evaluate and then take forward some of those more traditional quantifiable measures, that are above the line, but ask ourselves, are they the right ones? Are we tracking these because we always have? These are questions I ask on some of the advisory boards I sit on. Where are the more meaningful metrics? We're tracking these because we always have, but what else? What else do we need to know for good judgment and sound decision making? What else can we quantify? What else can we measure that's important in terms of those measures? But we also need to get better at measuring those more dynamic, human-centric, longer-term metrics that sit below the line. And those are the ones, as we've just explored together, that will help us build that sustainable productivity. Many of you will say, oh, I'm already, measuring engagement in the organization. That's already happening. Although I have to say the frequency varies dramatically. I talk to clients that do a weekly pulse check, and I talked to a client the other day that hasn't run an engagement survey for 3 years. So, the frequency is varied. However, the question is, are we asking our people the right questions? I'm starting to see more of this coming through. So an FMCG I was talking to lately have put in a question about discretionary effort. To what extent do you feel you are giving discretionary effort to your work? So that's the above and beyond, right, that we talk about, and that we would hope that there would be that give and take. If we are generous, we trust, and we give back, then employees in turn will step up when we need it. And are we linking our engagement data back to productivity data and looking at the correlation? So those are the questions to sort of think about there. And we've already said that the future of work and sustainable productivity over a longer working life is built on emotional connection. So how can we get our people feeling energized and engaged, productive, in their flow, doing the work they love, that they're really good at? Do we even ask these questions? Most problems are caused by a conversation we have not had. And yesterday in the people leader session, it was a terrific session, and they've got some really great tools and resources for their people leaders. But people are saying, well, how do I have the question? I never have time for the conversations, and it's so important, of course, that we're having those career conversations, not just the formal performance reviews, but the 1-minute manager approach. For anyone out there that's a 90s employee like me, I was training people in the 1-minute manager by Ken Blanchard, and it can only take a minute to make someone feel recognized, appreciated, and rewarded. So these are the golden threads to productivity. Okay, so what can we do about it? Well, a productivity diagnostic that is holistic will obviously help, and HSM have now started supporting organizations with this, with a new productivity diagnostic that has come out of the past 15 years of supporting organizations around some of these challenges, but has been validated most recently with the 2024 research theme that we ran across countries, across organizations, from executives to frontline. And this combines those important technical and human measures. So I'll just take a moment to take you through the definition, and by all means, take a screenshot so you can be thinking about these later. And I'll ask you as we go along and define these, just to share in the chat which ones, if any, are missing from the data set that you are using right now. So the first one is individual drive. So these are the metrics and measures that influence both short-term and long-term productivity, and include measuring things like energy, like discretionary effort, like focus and lack of, and impact of lack of, and motivation, level of motivation, and degree of autonomy. So those are the sorts of things that we know and we've just talked about are the things that at an individual level will drive productivity. Are we measuring them then? Because if we don't measure them, we're not going to act on them. If we don't have data to support a strategy to do better, then we will never do better. Workplace fitness is the second one, and this is the impact on an individual's efficiency and effectiveness at work through the impact of colleagues, organizational and job design, and impacts ultimately on a well-being, engagement and retention, and all of those things that we're talking about. Work networks measure if processes are enhancing or detracting from productivity at a team and a structural level. And I think that's a great question for a conversation in a one-on-one or in a career conversation. What is getting in the way of your success? What is detracting from your productivity? What are we doing as an organization from a policy and practice perspective that is taking the passion away? I think that's something to think about. Technical readiness is a priority area for most of us right now. How are we measuring what we call the collective technical foundation of the organization, and whether that technical foundation is contributing to skill and capability building for the future? And then the last indicator is market resilience. So this is sort of the more widely adopted traditional above the line measures. And these are the ones that drive tactical productivity. So, it might be speed, it might be unit production, it might be revenue per employee, profitability, and all of those things. So those are the measures. So let's have a look in the chat, Jacinta, and see where people feel they might be needing to focus in a little more. Let's have a look. You can improve what you don't measure, but you also get what you measure. Yes, very true. Yes, satisfaction and engagement. That's very good comment, Despina. Thank you. Agree.
Lead lag metrics was what something there.
Yes. Yes. John, as people machine linkage becomes more integral to organizational productivity, do we need to reframe some of the engagement questions? Absolutely. Yes, I think so. I think the question, are we asking the right questions, is a really crucial one. It's much easier to just roll the engagement survey and keep going as we are. Now, I think there should be a set of core questions for year-on-year tracking or month-by-month tracking, to look at the longitudinal trends and things like that. But there should be a subset of questions that are tailored to the work that we need to be doing going forward. And I think reframing that in this context is really important. Yes, and actually, again, psychological safety, you'll see that was something that sits below the line on the iceberg, and creating an environment of trust and a feeling where people can be open without fear of repercussion is really important to all of this, because we only want data if it's going to be reliable and valid and robust, as opposed to what people think we need to hear or want to hear. So it needs to be genuine. Excellent. Thank you for that. So let me now share with you a couple of case studies. And of course, if anybody wants more information on this or would be interested in taking part in the global test and trial phase, by all means, let us know. So using AI to increase workplace fitness at Hitachi, I just wanted to share just a couple of quick case studies of where this is playing out. So they focused on workplace fitness, and did a pilot program where they supported individuals adopting healthier habits that fed into overall well-being and happiness. And as you can see here, they are reporting a fairly significant uplift in performance. So if anyone has experience at Hitachi or is currently working at Hitachi, then by all means share and build upon that in the chat. Is anyone else doing anything like that in your workplace, looking at supporting individuals with those daily habits and new actions that they can adopt that will basically feed into a more engaged, healthy and productive, longer working life? Is anyone else doing anything in that regard? I'd be interested to know. And
Catherine asked the question there, how did the wearable measure happiness? Maybe people answered.
Yeah, it's self-disclosed. It's basically subjective self assessment of levels of happiness and stress and overall well-being questions. As well as the very clever use of AI, of course, to track the things that a Fitbit tracks around heart rate and stress levels, sleep, and those sorts of things that all feed into that overall picture of well-being. And then
Robin's mentioned an organisation she knows about has Wellbeing Wednesdays.
Yeah.
So it's building it into the terminology.
Yes, nice. It should be front and centre, given the impact that it has on engagement, on productivity, on retention, and then for the CFOs on the line, the cost of loss of people because of those things is way, way more than the cost of investing in it in the first place. And then we have Standard Chartered, who focused on tech readiness and how they could boost productivity through skilling, which, as you remember, came out, I think, number 2, just closely behind human-centric workplaces on our poll. And what they've done is create an internal gig economy and a talent marketplace. Now, that's not uncommon. A lot of organizations have been focusing here in recent years. I'm a big fan of the promotion of internal career mobility. You know, as I've mentioned before, working in career management for the past 20 years, this topic needs to be interrogated a lot more because the opportunities are huge. People find it easier to get a job outside of their organization than they do to get a job inside of their organization. And if we think about an iceberg analogy here as well, I'm obsessed obviously with icebergs. If we take the iceberg analogy, think about individuals in your team or people that you've worked with. So often we only see and recognize the visible skills and experience that sit above the line. What is the job you're doing now, and what are you showing me that you can do, rather than looking at the vast potential and capability and skill that sits below the line and stays invisible unless we're asking. So again, I can see why this Standard Chartered had such great results with this program and why it was, you know, why it was such a success, because actually digging in to people's, you know, intrinsic desires to do what they love, using the skills, building new ones, and doing meaningful work is what we're seeing play out here, although it's headlined tech readiness.
Alison, part of our survey found that this skills revolution is what we would call it, where you know, we would predict there'll be less focus on the job title and more on the skills you bring and you know, go into different teams or cross into different gig projects within. But we're seeing and hearing that from the interims who are out there working, the skills are being pulled on.
Yeah, and I am very hopeful that that will happen. We hear that a lot, and yet at a pragmatic level, we still see hiring managers saying, well, you're a square peg and you fit so neatly into my square hole, and overlooking this vast round peg talent community who bring diverse industry experience and a richness of perspective that perhaps they won't get with the square peg in the square hole. And I'm not saying that the square peg is not a good square peg. It could be very good, but you may be missing out on something by overlooking and ignoring, a diverse talent community. And I do unfortunately see that all the time and hear that all of the time. And I think actually the more pain we're in, the more we will have to be creative around our hiring and start to look beyond traditional boundaries. So yes, I'm sure you also see that a lot in your work, Jacinta. So just to sort of wrap up, really, there's been a lot of information sharing today, I know, but I do want to thank you all for your contributions along the way, contributing to the topic. That's been really excellent, really appreciate it. And as we've heard, cultivating productivity really begins at the level of the individual, but at the organizational level, we need to adopt really a very unique signature approach that's contextualized, that is how we look at defining productivity. I would add how we're talking about productivity, or are we talking about sustainable high performance and other, people may have other language, by all means put suggestions in the chat. So how we're defining it, how we're talking about it, how we're measuring it, hopefully more holistically, above and below the line, and then how we are developing it and nurturing it. And I'll end with the words of the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who said, "We can't build a future for our grandchildren, which is based on a system built for our grandparents." And yet, here we are. So, there we are.
Alison, a question I had right at the get-go today was, is sustainable high performance or sustainable productivity, how would that help us so that we don't tip over to burnout? Is there some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it comes back to that refund of time question. Yeah. And that's why my ears perked up when Alina from Microsoft was talking about who does the refund belong to and how do we make a call on that. And you know what, it might not be, one of my favorite mantras in life is it doesn't have to be an either or, it can be an and. So maybe if there's a refund of time, then it's a collaboration and a collective decision between the individual and the organization with what do you need and this is what I need, and let's share that refund of time. It doesn't have to be a win-lose. What we want is a position where everybody walks away reasonably happy. What we also need increasingly going forward is trust as a cornerstone of this new employee economy. And we need to let people think about the work they're doing and where best they might do it. So if you are doing a focused piece of work, if you're marking up a legal contract, if you're preparing for a presentation, if you're, writing an article, whatever it might be, designing something, which is asynchronous work, then you may be best off finding that quiet place wherever, remote from the office, to try and avoid those distractions. But if what you're looking for is collaboration and creativity and energy-driven work, then it goes without saying that that's best done potentially in person, although not at the exclusion of virtual. We just have to get better at being inclusive of virtual participants. So I think, those are some of the things that I would think about there. I mean, some research suggests that organizations that have deployed AI the best are reporting 79–80% gains in productivity, and employees are self-reporting gains of a similar sort of 70% plus in terms of how well organized they are around their work. And if we're well organized around our work, then generally we're going to get a bit of a refund of time back at the beginning or the end of the day. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. And then from an organisational point of view, this is being rolled out with the key organisations and partners of HSM. What's the feeling or the vibe or the feedback from organisations? Are they embracing a new measure of productivity, productivity linked to wellness and meaning? Was there a sense that that's something they could do, or was there a no way, get everyone back to the office 5 days and How was, and maybe, yeah, I'll leave that as the question. What are the companies feeling about this?
Yeah, it's a great question. The sentiment's really, really positive. It almost feels like the evidence and the data that some of our decision makers needed to start reframing this conversation back in the organization. I was talking to a client not long ago who said that, you know, a new productivity sort of measure had come out, and the way that it landed was like a wet sock. You know, it really then had a direct impact on the following month's engagement survey data, the well-being pulse, you know, because we talked about how you communicate and how it lands, and they can be really quite different, the intention and the reality. So I think a lot of people in our community and clients I've been speaking to certainly have really welcomed a fresh look at this topic.
Yep.
And all of Lynda's work stems from what she's hearing and seeing. Where are the pain points and the challenges, and how can we cut through, do the research, the primary and the secondary research, to cut through and make a complex subject simple. And that's the I think the beauty of this particular sort of diagnostic, is that it cuts through a lot of the noise and gives organizations that simple starting point to rethink it and reframe it.
A framework. And realize we're near the end, so I thought I would sort of ask one final question if I can. And I noted down for myself that you just said self-ownership of your career is really important, and be really disciplined about prioritizing, you know, whether it's be that half an hour a week or whatever. What's one thing that people on this call can do to help them prepare for their own future?
I would say investing in your own career development, professional development and learning would be number one. With the multi-stage life, we can never stop learning. We can never stop evolving, both at a personal and a professional level. So I would say, thinking about the 70-20-10 of learning, you know, 70 is on the job, it's iterative, it's in the flow of work, it's those organic moments, the conversations, the observations, those sorts of things that really can upskill us or sort of even reskill us. And then you've got the 20%, which is more your coaching, mentoring type learnings. What I would say there is, I've always recommended, and I do it myself, is to surround yourself with almost your own personal board of advisors. So rather than going for a one-on-one formal mentoring, that has its merits, absolutely, fan of that, but it's not an either or. Also, surround yourself with advisors and sounding boards and subject matter experts who have mastery in different topics. And you're not leaning on them unrealistically, but they are there as your go-to person, you know, your phone a friend. I think there's such richness and learning in there if we take the time. And then the third one obviously is the more formal 10% of learning. And that's where I'm saying, you know, even an hour a month, jump on a LinkedIn learning course, you know, attend a webinar. All of you are here today. You've all shown up for yourselves. So that's brilliant. This is the type of thing you're going to follow the dialogue online. There's so much knowledge and experience attending this call today, and you're sharing with each other. So, you know, I think that's really important as well. So just carving out that time, invest in yourself, because nobody's going to knock at your door and say, guess what, here's the gift of your future career. You've got to really be self-directed, commit to it, and you know, develop new skills, new ways of thinking as you go through the life course.
I would say to people that you know, the beauty of your career is you get to write the script, and we don't actually want anyone else to write our script. So therefore, no one else cares as much about your career, Alison, or my career for me as I do or you do. So it's that self-interest is always powerful, and so it should drive our career. And you know, I heard that today. We are near the top of the hour. We have reviewed 15 years worth of data very quickly. We've looked at a new tool, a productivity diagnostic. We've thought about what it means for individuals. Alison, you are always so fabulous in this. You're so passionate about this. You've got your own business, Recreate 100. So encourage anyway, and that is focused, I believe. If you can sort of maybe give us a wrap that you've decided to really sort of start a business that's focused on this longevity.
Yeah, have a look at recreate100.com and please give us a follow on LinkedIn. It's a new venture, co-founded with my former Sageco business partner. So we had a very successful and wonderful 20-year relationship, and then divested, and the business was acquired, and we've now reformed. Remember what I said about friendships at work? That's one of my most significant friendships at work, but professionally and personally, and we've regrouped and reformed to do Recreate 100 together. So very exciting, and it's based actually and inspired by the work of Lynda Gratton and Andrew Scott, who is an economist and also a professor at London Business School, and their work in the 100-Year Life. But there's so much great content out there. Chris Hemsworth and Limitless, my neighbour up here in the Northern Rivers, that's a great series. And obviously Dan Buettner and the Blue Zones, just very passionate about that work. So would love to connect with anyone interested in that as well. Thank you so much, Jacinta. It's been great to be in conversation with you today.
Always is, Alison. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is, as I said, wraps up our masterclass series for 2024. We value you being part of our network and helping us to grow the interim world that we're all working in. So enjoy your day, and thanks for joining us today. See you later.
Thanks so much.